Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at integrating a data source, in this case, a JSON-based data source, into vMix to create a slide-out news window that you could use in your productions. And we'll go into the details for all of that. But before we get into that, again, I welcome everybody. If you have any questions, want to get anything discussed here during the show, just throw your question in the comments, and we'll get to it here on air. Also, if you would like to join us live on air, that would be phenomenal. We have a link in the show notes, so if you could just click on that link, somebody from the studio will get you on air with us. So let's get started. In today's show, I wanted to cover something. Somebody had asked in comments a few shows back if I could do something that looked at sort of integrating JSON data in a more foundational way, look at sort of as a basic capability, how that integrates in vMix. And I thought that would probably be a good topic to cover today. And for this, we are going to be taking news from a website. There's something called newsapi.org that has a JSON API feed that you can pull news from. And so we actually made a copy of that because they have a limited number of polls that we can do in the free developer version. But so we copied that XML, that JSON file here locally to use for this demo. But essentially, what we'd be doing in this is we'd be going out to a URL, requesting a reload of information. That information would be delivered back to us in JSON, and we'd integrate that JSON file through the vMix data source manager into a vMix production. And so that's exactly what we're going to cover. And the place to get started with that is actually Data Source Manager. So let me go. If you go to the little hamburger window in the lower right side of the screen on vMix, that's down here. You can go up and there is Data Source Manager. You click on that and you actually open up the location in vMix that lets you integrate all of the external data sources you want to bring in. And the way this works, so let me sort of take a step back here. The way this works is that if you have a new data source you want to leverage, you click the plus sign, and it asks what format is this data going to be coming to us in. And you have a fairly broad range of choices here. You have an Excel or CSV. So this is sort of your standard Excel or comma separated variable. That's the CSV. And that basically means I have, a value, comma, value, comma, value. And so it will take and create rows out of all of that. So that is one mechanism. The next is Google Sheets. And we've covered this in the past, and it's probably something we'll revisit to make sure we've covered everything with the most current implementations of Google. But this is another mechanism to bring data in. You point to a sheet in Google, which is basically a spreadsheet, and it will pull the data in off that sheet and lets you do that. You have what we're going to be using today, which is a JSON-based file or URL. We also have RSS. RSS is something that was more popular in the past than it is now. It stands for really simple syndication. It was a way that sites would feed news stories out to external consumers of that information. It's really been superseded by formats like JSON, but it's still there because there are sites that still have data that are available in that format. The other then is text, which, as it implies, is just a flat text file. And the other is something that we've used multiple times, which is XML. XML is in many ways similar to JSON. It's a structured way of organizing data, and it really works around sort of a name value pair. In JSON, this would be like properties and values, and XML, it's name values, but conceptually they're the same. JSON has a lot of advantages from a coding point of view, where it's very efficient for web-based coding. And because of that, it's really becoming the premier way most people are going to share data on the web today. So these are the methods that you have for bringing data in. So let me actually go and so we'll take and we'll bring in this file again. I'll just sort of show you. So if I said I want to take in a JSON file, I can come in, I can give this any name. We'll just say this is my demo version of the file. And I can, you notice I can say I can do a URL or a file name. So this was originally a URL. We have a special API key to get to it, but we've sort of run out of our cycles on that. So I can actually just go and say, I want to load in the JSON file as an actual file. And so when I open this, you'll see now that it's pointing to a file. And if I say, OK, this area then fills in. And what you have are, these are all of the, what basically are the properties, and then the values associated with those properties. And this JSON file is actually broken up as sort of a core header and then an array of articles. So before we dive into sort of the integration piece of this data, let's actually look at the JSON file directly here, because I have this in Visual Studio Code. So this is JSON. You're looking at something that, if you've looked at XML, you can see some of the similarities, but syntax here is different. And this is really how this data is coming in. We have, as I said, properties and values. Those values can be strings, they can be numbers, they can be Boolean. They can be things like undefined, where you just say, it has a value, but I don't have a value for it yet. So just sort of stays there. The other thing that you can see is anytime you see this little curly bracket up here, that curly bracket indicates that I have a JSON object. And an object can be composed of these property value pairs. It can be composed of other objects. It can be composed of arrays of objects. So if you see here, these are property values. And then this property called articles has this square bracket. And this square bracket is an indicator of an array. And so inside this JSON file, we have an array of articles. And you'll see, again, each one of these articles, if you look right here, has a little curly bracket around it. So that means it's a JSON object. And then it has a set of properties inside. So source is basically sort of, it has an ID and a name. So this is an object inside an object. So that's that one example. Then we have name value pairs, these properties and their values. So we have author, title, description, different URLs for, where the article is, where the image for the article is, and timestamps and other things that you have in here. And so this is the data that we are pulling in. And if you look at the JSON, and we'll go into this in a second, when you see how we brought it into Data Source Manager, these properties that you see along the side are actually the properties that go along the top of the property bar over here, where you see things like author, title, that this is all the information it's pulling out here. And you see it has source, ID, and name, which are these things over here at the very beginning. So source ID, source name. So that's all getting pulled out of this piece up front. And if you remember, source up here is an object. So it's source and ID and source and name. And that's exactly how it shows up here inside of vMix. It has the source ID and the source name. And then it goes to the individual properties and the values that are assigned to them. And these rows are each one of those entries in the array. So that hopefully breaks this down into something that is more understandable structurally when it comes into vMix. So before I get into how to actually start to tie this into vMix proper and get it to display, I wanted to get over to the comment section over here. So we have several people here. So we have Rudy has joined us, Rudy Engels. Rudy, great to see you here again. Thank you for making the time. We have Aziz is back. Aziz, thank you. Great to see you here again. And we have JP. JP, hi to you as well. Thank you. We have Samuel Nordvik. Samuel, greetings back. Thank you. And we have Dennis van Dalen. Hopefully I've said that name correctly. Join us from the Netherlands. So, Dennis, thank you for joining us here. Okay, so let's jump back in now, and we'll talk a little bit more about the data source manager than actually. Oh, we also have Bill Mew just joined us on this last moment here. Posted hi from the UK. Bill, thank you for joining us. So, so we'll just take one more quick look over here at data source manager, and we can, then move on to the actual tie-in together. So if you'll notice, the way I have this set up when I go in and create something is I have a data source and then a table. And those are the two elements that when I'm talking to vMix, some of the things that I need to do, like pull elements out to say display this news article, I need to know what the data source name is. In this case, it's NVIDIA because it's an article, an array of articles about NVIDIA. And the table itself is just called JSON. So that's how we have this set up. So that just keep that in the back of your head as we start to dig into how we took care of all this. So let me close this out here. And one of the things that you need in order to work with this data inside of vMix is, let me open up GT Title Designer here. And you need to have a title set up for this. And so I'm just going to open this up here. And let's see if I can open up. Yeah, this I think is what we had before. So this is the title that I put together for our news stories. And this title is how we're going to take the data that is sitting in Data Source Manager and get it onto a display in vMix. So the way we have to do that, like when you start, your first goal is to basically say, what data, what elements do I want to display? So in this case, I have it broken down where I said I wanted the name of the publication that it's this news source is, the byline, so that's the author, whoever wrote the article. If there was a photo or some sort of picture associated with it, I wanted that. I wanted the headline, a date and time, and then a story summary. So when I set this up, what I needed to make sure is that I had elements inside of GT Title Designer that would correspond to each of these. And so basically that's what I did. If you look on the layers section on the side, here I have publication, which you can see is that name up there. It's just a text block, and I gave it the name publication. We have the date and time, which is sitting down here. We have the summary, which is the block sitting here. We have the byline, which again is up top. We have the headline itself, which is that. We have the news background. Now, this is important. I wanted to have something that I could layer all of these textual elements onto. So I have this background here, which is really just a dark, semi-transparent border with a cutout that I have where I can place a picture. And that's the way I set this up. So in this, if you see, if I shut this off, which I just hide it, you see this is not particularly usable and doesn't have great structure, visual structure to it. So when I have this here now, it makes it much easier to see. And so I put that there as a layer. But because what I want to do now is I still have like a picture to put in, under this, I now have my story image. So that's this picture that you see here. So now I have like a cutout that's sitting inside this background that just has a fully transparent opening in it. And then under that, I put the picture that I want. And the thing about the picture here is the picture is actually a URL. It's saying, here's where you go out on the web to grab the image that we're going to be using. So it isn't even an image file, but it's an image file at a URL out on the web. So we have that. But under it, I have two more things. And certain articles I found did not have any image associated with them. So I wanted something where if you didn't have an image, you'd get something that would display no image available. So people knew it wasn't just like a hole sitting in the middle of your screen. So, so by doing that, just sort of shutting this on and off, you can see if there's an image there to be shown, it shows up. But if not, these two layers beneath that, where the text that says no image, and then this black background, which sort of sits behind that, are now there as well. So if we don't have an image available, you'll still see something there, and it makes visual sense. So let's sort of close out of here. Let me just go back. I want to make sure that we have a few more people have joined us here. So let's see. We have Matt Thomas Taylor. Love the show. Watch almost every. Matt, we definitely appreciate that. And it's great to have, the community here. That's really inspiring to me, and I appreciate it very much. And then we have Vaby. Vaby, thank you for joining us. Hello back to you. So, okay. So let's now look. We have the title that we set up. We have the data source that we set up. And now what we need to do is sort of marry those two together. So if we come over to vMix, what you're going to see here is we have the title loaded here. It's called News Slide, and we have that set up here. And when you load this, it will just load in as a regular, whatever the text and the images that I had there show up. But what you can then do, if you right click on the title, it has something called Title Editor. And when you open Title Editor up, what it will let you do is say, take those elements that I wrote inside of my GT title. If you remember, publication, date, time, summary, all those things are things that we had inside of GT title. So I'm taking these, and as opposed to just having the text that I had in GT title there, what I can do is I can go up to data sources, and then I can select the data source, the table in that data source, and the specific column name, which is basically the property that we talked about. That's the property that I want. So what I am doing is I'm going in and I'm saying, let's take from the data source NVIDIA, the table JSON, I want to take the source name. And the source name is the name of the data source, so the publication name. So that is giving me that publication. And as you can see, it's showing, ithome.com is the publication name. And what it's showing me for is it's showing it for whatever row inside of Data Source Manager is selected. So if you remember, when we loaded Data Source Manager, we had an array of articles that were coming in from this table. And so in that array, I'm just picking which one of those array entries do I want. That's an article. So I get to say, pick whatever article is selected. But you could pick any article. So if I just come up here and change it, you can see that everything now is, it's just going to change to whatever that particular row has. That's Motley Fool. So, but what I really want to do is use selected, because that gives me the most flexibility when I'm setting this up. And so we do this for each one of these fields. So if you're coming in here, I don't have to go through all of them, but if we look at summary, it's the same sort of thing. But now I'm going saying, I want to pull in the content. That's what I have for summary, is this sort of abbreviated content. And again, it works the same way, all of the selected row. So when we have that, that's for all, if you notice, that's for all the text fields. We also have images though. So if you remember, I set up that background where I said I had the sort of faded out black with a border around it, and then a cutout hole in the middle for the picture. I don't want to do anything with that. That picture, I want to stay there. That's exactly as it was inside of my GT title. But the story image now will change from story to story. So I want to come here and I want to be able to click on story image and go to data sources. And you can see what I have here now is something that says, I want to go, I want to find the URL for the image. What is the web address that I'm going to use to pull that image in? And so in this case, that's how I'm getting the image. So even though there's no image for this first one, let me just go and select somebody else that has an image. You can now see that here is the URL that it's pulling to get that image in. So when I go here and I select this, if I selected the fourth row in Data Source Manager, it would be going to this URL to pull the image. So I have now all of this mapping. And so that's sort of like following this logically. We go from set up the data, set up the title, then map the data to the title. And this allows me now to work with it. So let's take a look now that that's sort of all of the detail work in terms of getting data into your production. Now you'll notice here that I have this sitting here as my current title. So that's sort of the first entry in the array. But let me open up Data Source Manager because I want to show you something which might not be that obvious. So if you look over here, if I come and select any of the stories now in Data Source Manager, it is dynamically changing what we have in this title. And that's because I said use whatever the selected column, the selected row is inside of Data Source Manager. And by doing this now, I have the ability to jump around and everything will change dynamically as I move around. It isn't clear, but I can actually take this and I could just drag this. So if I'm maybe we can take a two-shot or with the two of these. So let's see. If you want now, I can change any of these here with this off to the side, and I can still fully operate vMix. So I could cuts and do everything else and still keep this in a separate window to go and decide what actually is selected over here. So having this now is very, very flexible. It becomes like a little cockpit for me where it's like, okay, I see a story, I think it's interesting. I can select that one. And then when I want to, I can just pop it on screen. So this is something that you don't think of Data Source Manager as staying open as sort of an active tool, but it is, and it can be used this way. The other thing though that you can use, so let me sort of close out of this again and we'll sort of jump back over to this guy here. The other thing that we can do is we can come and in vMix, I can just go and say, let's set up some shortcuts that we want to do. Which can do effectively the same thing. I can select different rows inside my Data Source Manager. So let me come over here and we'll sort of show that as the next step here. So if I go to Settings and to Shortcuts, I set up a bunch of shortcuts here that are just sort of hooked up to a Stream Deck I have on the side. And so this will let me go to the top news story, so sort of the first story. Then I can go to previous news, the next news, all of that is sort of baked in here. So let's just take a look at sort of the top news story. So what I'm doing in here is I'm looking for a particular Stream Deck button. And then I go to Data Source Select Row. And if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning that you need to know the source, the table. That's this information down here. The data source name, the table name, and in this case, which row am I selecting? So when I say I want to go to the top news story, what I'm going is saying in my data source NVIDIA, the table JSON, which is these news articles, go to the first entry in it. So it's sort of in that array, which one do I pick? And I pick number 1. So that's one option that we have, and that lets me sort of jump right to the top. The other option I have is to go forward and backwards. So if I come here, I can come back and say, go to data source next row. So in this case, I don't really care what row I'm on. I'm just saying, go to the next row. And so now all I need to specify is the data source and the table, but I don't specify any row. So now this button is directly assigned. So when I press it to say, jump to the next headline. So that's, and we can do that. We have the same thing now for a previous headline. So it's sort of all in the same space. So I can go to the top, I can go to the previous, I can go to the next. That's all there. So the next one that I do, since I have this sort of sitting here, is say, if I want to show the news, I'm just going to use an overlay. Just standard way most information like this gets placed on screen so it can just be popped off. So the overlay is going to use all the transparency inside of the GT title. Because if you remember, everything that was cut out, everything that was semi-transparent, that all translates right into here as an overlay. So you're going to see the entire picture under it off to the side. You'll see the cutout where the photo is from the news article. You'll also see the detail under, like through that semi-transparent piece. So if you come here, let me sort of jump out of here, and we'll look over here now. If I were to just put this on screen, you can see now all of that's there. It slides through. You can see everything. All of this is still open. So all of that information is still over there. And one of the things, though, that you might have noticed when this got pulled off is that this over here changed. And so what I wanted to do in doing this was have a way when I put an article on, it would stay on for a certain amount of time, then pull itself off and automatically go to the next news article in the row. So this is something that could be very simple. If you had a set of pre-canned, say these are things that were sponsored that you had, and you had to go through each sponsor. You could have set this up as a JSON file with all the sponsor information, and then every time you hit next, you'll get the next sponsor queued up. Or you could just turn around, and if you look, I'm just going to put this over here so you see it pop out. So no hands. It'll go there, stay about 8 seconds, 9 seconds. It'll come off the screen, and then it'll change to the next row. So you get the next thing queued up. So this can be done. So now all I have to do is press a single button, and the next news article comes on. It stays on for whatever the required time is. And then when it comes off, we switch to the next article. And the way we're doing that is something called triggers. So let me take a look at that side now too. So if I come over here, let's see, I have this, when I clicked on the little gear associated with the overlay, come over to triggers, and you'll notice that I have 2 triggers that are set up. And what a trigger is, it says when a certain event happens, the trigger for the action, I want you to do the following. So what I said is when on overlay, basically when this source is on overlay, has the overlay in, what I want to do now is say, I want to wait for 8 seconds, 8,000 milliseconds, and then I want to execute the function output overlay 1, input 1 out, which basically slides it off. So automatically now, once I put that through an overlay in, it's going to come back and say, okay, now count to 8 and then execute the command to take it off. So that's why it comes up, shows up there, and then slides off. The next thing that we have here is on overlay out, which is saying whenever this overlay goes off the screen, I want you to wait 500 milliseconds, or it takes 500 milliseconds for it to slide off. Then I want you to execute data source next row. So what it's doing then is I show it, it comes off itself after 8 seconds. And once it comes off and is fully off the screen, it goes to the next row in my data source. So very, very simple mechanism here to do what is really a pretty cool single button push type of functionality, where you can do the one thing and everything downstream from that happens. And you could think of different ways that you could use this yourself in all types of setups, but the core concepts here around working with data, mapping the data to titles, putting the titles on screen and pulling them off using triggers to do certain actions, all that stuff is sort of baked in here. So that's really what I wanted to cover here in total. So let me just check, because I think we have a few more people have chimed in here to say hello. So we have Crooker is wishing us a good day. So hope that gun's not pointed at me, but thank you, Crooker, for joining us. Definitely appreciate it. So we have Dave Edwards. Dave, good to see you here again. Thank you for joining us. So we have Alexis Cordoba. So he's saying greetings from Buenos Aires. I'm glad you found this a useful tutorial. And we have Richard Ignacio. Richard, always good to see you. He is from Southern California, I believe, Richard. So nice to have you here. So thank you. So let's see. Aziz is asking, how do I integrate my own design as a template into vMix? Okay, so typically, if I want to create a design, let me go into GT title over here. If I open this up. So when I open up GT Title Designer, could just be taking time. Oh, it's open already. Sorry. So if I go in, I'll just do something new here and save the changes. So if I want to open up something new, it asks me what resolution. I can now start to layer in elements. So one of the things you can do is you can take and load an image. And so in here, I'll just do this so I have an image here that I could actually play with here. I can just take this now. You see, I just loaded this image. So this image could have been a backdrop with all sorts of branding or anything else that I wanted on it. And I could then be layering text over it and do whatever I want. So, and I could, put this here however I wanted to set this. So as I'm starting to build this now, I load in images that really have my detailed branding. I can take and put color boxes and other things which could have sort of the image color related branding. So if I wanted to get sort of this orange and this blue in here, I could match those up exactly, have those as colors, and then go in and assign that to rectangular objects or other shaped objects, circles, triangles, and the like that I could use. And then using the fonts, then I could also have sort of font details that would be my brand. If I use specific fonts for, company names, product names, other things, you could do all that. But really, the fact you have the ability to bring in images, and this would be done something probably through Photoshop or something similar to that. Affinity Designer is another really good one a lot of people like. That's how you would sort of generate that branding side to all of this. So let's see. So hopefully, Aziz, that helped. So we have American Newscape. Thank you. Appreciate you joining. So you have Gunnar from Sweden. You got this. That's what I hope every week. It's sometimes I feel closer to the edge than others, but this is a fun show to do. So Aziz actually has a little more detail on this. He said, I should have mentioned that my layout is animated. Okay, so if I had an animated layout, there's two things to this. So if you have something that's more of an animated background that you can use, the way you could do this, let me sort of close out of this. GT Title Design, I don't want to save this. So if I'm in here with this news slide, what I could do is I could create a new, let me just do it as a blank input, just make it a little easier because I could do that right from here. If I just create a new blank input, what I can do then is I could put in layers. And so if I can put in a layer, I'll say in my background layer, I want this camera and I'm going to size it. And this, what I'm doing here could easily be some moving background elements. Say you had a little logo in the upper corner here that, you want it to be able to say, okay, this is part of my overlay. But then you can turn around and say, then what I'm going to do in layer 2 is I'm going to put the news slide here. And now with this setup, uh, hardly an exemplary thing, but if I come here and put this up, I didn't put anything, so I probably should have done this with a transparent background. So actually, I mean, we're here, so I will change this as we're going. So if I go in and say I want to change this, I want to go color, I want to say transparent. So now you'll see what I have here is I set this up and it has this moving element and static elements. So it would be possible for you to take what you want to do with dynamic elements, create, whether it's something in After Effects that just loops or does whatever you want, some video that has baked in pre-multiplied transparency, layer that in with other textual elements that you're going to lay on top of it, and do that as a set of layers on an input in vMix, and then use that input with the layers as your tool for creating sort of the dynamic motion inside an overlay. And that can work for anything. You want to do lower thirds that way, where you have like turning gears on the side and streaking bars. You can do all that and just put the text elements on top of that. And the easiest way to do that usually is to take a snapshot of the framework that you're using for the animated piece, put that into your GT title designer in the background, lay out all your text elements on top of that, then hide that before you save it. And when you build the stack, now everything will be lined up the way you need it. So that's one possible way. If the objects themselves have to move, that's like the data objects that you're manipulating here have to move. That could be a little bit harder, and that probably, you'd have to look at it case by case to see what would be the best way to try and get something that looked right for that. But this should give you at least a head start. So let's see, we have a few more. So Hakan, is saying hello from Stockholm, Sweden. Hakan, thank you for joining us here. So Dennis is asking, is it possible to show the overlay automatically when a new row is added in the internet JSON file? I don't believe that there is a way to trigger that outside of scripting running in the background. So the short answer is with scripting, absolutely. And that would probably be, if I were doing things that I want to dynamically sort of refresh and update, that would be the way I would do it. I'd write a script that just continually ran in the background, and anytime, it would keep reading this text from a website. And then what I'd probably have the script do would be I'd have it write directly to the title to update what I wanted to update. And there's actually an added benefit to the scripting side. Let me just sort of, if we could take the output from vMix, I just want to sort of show this title up in higher resolution because I want to point something out that I didn't really mention. If you look right here, this piece with the date on the bottom, that is really ugly. But that's the way the date is coming to us from JSON. So one of the advantages you get when you use something like scripting to work with data sources is that I could take that date and I could reformat it into something very nicely. I could do things to say, if I am in this country, I want to create a different format than if I'm in this country because they use month and date in reverse order. So there are different things you could do to make sure it reflects, how you want to package that specifically. The other thing you could do is you could turn around and change sizes of things if you had more text or less text. So you sort of fill things up or make intelligent decisions about where to cut things off. So you don't like have orphan words, or you can sort of cut things off at the last sentence or use logic. So scripting gives you a lot of power with how you want to format and sort of summarize, repackage the data that you're going to display. And that would probably be the way I do it if you wanted to do something which would show up as a dynamic update every time something new came on a website. So hopefully that helps. But that may be a good topic to do as another show at some point, because I could certainly see lots of use cases for that. All right. So Aziz just said thank you. So Aziz, I appreciate you asking the question. This is always good to discuss. So why don't we call this a wrap for today's show? We'll jump over to the post-show hangout. As I mentioned, in all likelihood, we're not going to have a show next week. I'm going to be on the road most of the week, and we'll, not have any serious time to prepare a show. So our next show will probably be 2 weeks. I mean, I'll let you know as we get to Friday, but right now it's probably not going to be a show next Friday, but I definitely will do one the Friday after. And if you can join us for the hangout, that's great. If not, I will see you in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye. Excuse me. Thank you, everyone. I was getting a little dry there. So thank you all for hanging with me this long. This show was something where I think it was Bill Mew had mentioned that he thought this would be a good topic to cover, like JSON and sort of at a more foundational level. So hopefully this addressed some of those things. Dennis, thank you for joining. I am humbled by the number of people that tune in every week. So thank you very much. Definitely appreciate it. So I thought that, based on that, this could be an interesting show. And I was hopeful that it combined a few things. So I wanted, the sort of the pipeline to make sense, where you thought about it from the elements in the data to the elements in the title to the mapping, and that whole thing made sense. But also some of the other things with the automation piece, where you can use triggers to do things. We use the shortcuts to move through data. Some of that stuff, even if you knew the basic data stuff, some of that stuff may not have been as obvious. So I wanted to make sure we could wrap that together into a show. So let's see. So Aziz is saying this brought another idea to his mind. He was wondering, is there a live polling option to add for or from Zoom participants in vMix? So it's a little more difficult. So when you do anything with polling, that has to be written out in some place that is visible. So, something on the web that I can access. Or it has to be packaged in some visual that I can sort of cut it out, crop it, and position it somewhere on screen to have that type of feedback. So in terms of doing sort of live polling across things like Zoom or other things, that's a little more difficult. I mean, Zoom may have APIs for this. I'll be very honest up front. I'm not an expert in the Zoom API or how you can interact with all of the elements in that. So I don't know if that's something that is exposed, but certainly, I mean, we did a series of 3 shows specifically on sort of doing polling, and well, not polling so much as question and answer, where you could look at who picked which answer to a question, so you could do a quiz show style. But a lot of those elements would definitely come into the polling space. We also have polling coming as an add-on into our live to air product, and again, that will use XML and JSON data that will be written out that you could pick up and use. So if you had people like sort of 12 guests on something, you wanted to poll your guests, you could pull that information from them. So that's another element to the polling piece that's there. So we did the shows before, and which were all about Node.js and show how to build that all out. And we will be adding this into live to air. I know this isn't specifically what you were asking, but I'd have to see if there's something we could do with Zoom as well to pull that out as raw data if you wanted to use that. And then you'd need to have enough context. So it wouldn't just be the data, but I'd need to know which person had which, you know, polled which way, and know how to describe all that. So there's a few elements underneath it that would need to be part of this, but that could definitely be a possibility. So I'll take a look and see if I can figure out anything. So JP is saying you could possibly try to set up Google Sheet to read last entry in a cell, then let that feed to the data source. Yes. So one of the things that you can do, and I didn't really mention it in talking about Data Source Manager, is you can continue to poll the data source and have it refresh. And then, from there, you could use that to sort of come back and say, is there something new in there? So that there may be a way to do that. I'd have to look at the dates and times. I mean, now that you mentioned this, it's something I didn't actually look at, but let me see if I can see the ordering for this in dates and times. So it looks like, okay, so what's interesting here is it looks like the item on the top is the latest, the most recent item that has come in. And these seem to be getting sort of earlier. So what this means then is that you can always go to 1, and if you poll at sufficient frequency, you can turn around and say, if I get something new, I know it's going to be number 1. So you will automatically do that as an update. So you just keep displaying what's ever in number 1 position. And then, this will give you, I don't know if you get any notification now that there was an update. So without scripting, there's no easy way to read this and say, has the date and time of the last entry changed? So you wouldn't necessarily know from there, but you will know that entry 1 is always your most recent. So that's JP, that was sort of a good thought on that. And I think the fact that we're reading this out and seeing that it comes in where 1 is the most current means that there is an easy way to pick the most recent element that has been updated. But I'm not sure that would give you the ability to capture everything. If there were a couple of things that changed in an update, you could miss stuff. But just wanted to check that. That was a thought that hit me as doing. So we know that number 1 in the list, select row 1, is always going to give you the most current. Okay, so Gabor Broder, he's saying, for live polling, you should use something like Mentimeter. Put the generated QR code as the lower third, and it takes them to the polling. So yeah, there are definitely third-party things. So Gabor, thank you for calling, pointing that out. There are a lot of third-party things for polling, for quizzes, for games, for other things that you can do that can all sort of be integrated into vMix or whatever switcher automation system you're using. And I think that's an important point. If you want to do these types of things, you can certainly look at the third-party ecosystems. And the fact that things are so open here, that you can take a web page into vMix. So if Mentimeter actually came out and gave you a web page with a some sort of transparent background that you could take and pull in as graphics, that's something you could definitely use for doing those types of things. Where if you want to display polling results and other things on top as an overlay, definitely ways to do that. So Gabor, thank you. So let's see. So Bill Mew is saying, this is really useful. Can't wait to try it out. Yeah, I think once you recognize the quantity of data that's actually out in the world, just going on the web and type JSON data sources, sports scores, news, you'll find that there's a lot of stuff, and for some of it actually is sort of put into public domain. Now, I don't know, globally, but I believe that most of the assets, if they are collected by the government, at least in the United States, those assets are available for common use because they collectively belong to everybody. The government collected them. So, so for that sort of stuff, I think that could be very interesting. You could go and look for these and say, there could be lots of different things I could do to create some sort of dynamic flow in my product. And the other thing to keep in mind is you can use external graphics packages too and bring this in. So, as Gabor was pointing out about Mentimeter, there are other, CG packages that will do all different types of graphics, create dynamic graphs. So if you, change values, you can just grow or shrink the graphs and basically see that sort of stuff move more like a dashboard, an information dashboard. And those things could be really useful. So cool information that you could package in different ways. So Bill's asking, how does this work with the quiz format that you did a few weeks ago? You wouldn't be selecting rows in the quiz results. So it doesn't directly. So let me put it that way. What I could have done is I could have taken those results and I could have written them out into sort of different rows that I could have. And by doing that, you could end up with effectively the ability to use GT title and pull that in. I just did it all from basically I set my own titles up and I populated them and made things visible or invisible based on what you saw there. So, I mean, a lot of the things that were in the titles, I was using scripting to hide them. So if I had, 15 people respond to a quiz question, even though I just would show the 15, like I'd fill up one row and then I'd fill up the next row, you would turn around and say that whole row had sort of all the background elements and everything else for guests there. And so all I would do is I would turn all those background elements off. And then when I would go to put the data in for that guest, I would turn all those background elements on for that guest slot. And so it allowed me to do things which had more of a dynamic look and could adjust. So I think in there I had like 4 potential answers and who responded to each way. So in that, each one of those had like 20 some slots. And so if I had like 6 and 4 and 12, whatever, you could have that go in there and it would just fill in those 6, 4, 12, and you'd see it that way on the screen without all the other blank slots. So that was the real difference. But I could have just written that as JSON and somebody could have picked that up and done what they wanted with it downstream. So it isn't that they're really incompatible. I just wrapped it all into one process to do this. And also because I was doing a lot of signaling. So I knew when I opened the poll question and when I closed it and I compiled the answers and then when I loaded the next question. So there's a lot of stuff that I was doing on the back end with the data for the poll data or the quiz data versus the actual responses because that was coming in dynamically. So different things, but it's a very good point. I mean, once something is in a data format, you can pull it into data sources, through any other, CSV, XML, JSON, any of those. So you have that ability there to do that. So he said, it's not really a good idea for live commentary. You need to vet the comments. So yes, that is, I can tell you for a fact that there are comments that come in here that don't make it on screen. And, we do have somebody that's trying to vet through everything and try to kick off people who, for some reason, think that being disruptive is a positive community trait. But so yeah, it's I totally agree. You don't want to just do live the comments coming in live. That's a risky idea. And as soon as somebody knows you're doing it, you're basically like inviting them in to say, spam me, spam my community. So yeah, I definitely agree, JP. So Talk for us is saying you can even have After Effects generate data-driven graphics and output is NDI live. And yeah, I mean, Hakan, that's a great idea and probably a great thought for doing something with the show. So let me look into that because that seems like it could be really, really interesting way to do that. But yes, so anything externally that can generate, that can manipulate data, generate a format for displaying it, and then render that in some way that can be picked up by vMix is perfect. And you know, for After Effects, I do know there's a lot of smarts in After Effects to do some dynamic things. So that would really be a cool thing to try. So actually, I'm pretty excited about that. Thank you, Hakan. Uh, I'm definitely looking forward to giving that one a try and seeing what I could make happen with that. So sounds very cool. Thank you. Yeah. So Gabor is saying, you know, that it definitely has a good point, and I agree. Uh, so yeah, and this would be interesting because I know some people that have used Premiere where they're taking and grabbing sort of these dynamic media files. And I know that can be generated on the TriCaster side. I don't know if vMix has that ability, but they can be generated on the TriCaster side and pulled in. They can do edit clips and stack those all up to do things like highlight reels and other things during a game. So you can have somebody working off of the recording of the game to pull out clips dynamically and then, you know, feed them in one after the other. It's almost like playlists out of Premiere where you can pull it in right away. So American Newscape, thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I'm coming away with more good ideas than I came in with. So I appreciate this discussion an awful lot. This is a lot of fun here. Hopefully, we'll be able to explore that and see if we can do something with it. All right. If there are any other questions, let's get them in now. Oh, Hakan is saying that he heard rumors it has been used in the NFL. That would be interesting. I mean, most of the major sports leagues are doing incredible things with graphics and data. So I definitely, you know, would love to see what else we could add to this and see if it makes sense for anything that you know, anything that you guys would be interested in doing. If we can sort of tie in some of these external tools like After Effects. So it gives me something to do in my spare time. But all right then, why don't we call this a wrap for today? Thank you all for joining me here. Really appreciate it. This was a fun show. And as I said, we won't be here next week, but we'll definitely you know, be looking to do a show in 2 weeks. And Battle for Freedom gave us a yeah. Sorry to join late. Great having you here, Battle. So thank you very much for joining us. Everyone, thank you. We'll see you soon. Take care.